For 30 days, Lady Helena Ashworth slept alone in a house that belonged to her husband. No candle carried down the corridor. No footstep paused outside her door. Just a cold, magnificent house, and a man who vanished every evening as though the setting sun itself were something to escape. The town of Bath whispered that Lord Rowan Ashworth had married a stranger and buried her in the countryside like a shameful secret. Her own aunt believed he'd taken a mistress. But the truth was not hiding in another woman's arms. It was hiding behind a door he had bolted shut himself, and when Helena finally opened it, she understood why he could never let her close. The register at St. Michael's had barely dried when Helena Fairfax became Lady Ashworth. She remembered counting her own heartbeats in the vestry, because it was easier than looking at the man beside her. Lord Rowan Ashworth was 34, unfairly handsome, and utterly unreachable. In the whole ceremony, he had spoken to her exactly 3 times, and the third was only, "Shall we go?" Their marriage had been settled the way most marriages of consequence were settled, on paper, by men who never had to live inside the arrangement. Her father's estate was drowning in debt and desperate for a title to shore it up. Lord Ashworth had the fortune, the name, and, as the gossip said, a sudden and rather urgent need for a wife. Nobody asked why the need was so urgent. Helena hadn't asked either. She told herself she didn't care to know. The journey to Thornfield Hall took 2 days by carriage, and it was, without question, the longest 2 days of her life. They sat across from one another in a silence so complete she could hear the rain finding its way through a crack in the roof. Lord Ashworth did not read. He did not sleep. He stared at a fixed point somewhere past her shoulder, his gloved hand curling into a fist on his knee, then forcing itself flat again, over and over, like a man rehearsing patience he did not feel. Helena was 23, sensible enough to know better than to expect tenderness from a bargain. But she had always had a restless, noticing sort of mind, and she noticed everything about him. The tightness at his jaw, the shadows bruised beneath his eyes, the way his breath caught faintly whenever the carriage lurched too hard. He looked less like a bridegroom and more like a man steeling himself for a battle no one else could see. Thornfield Hall rose out of the fog at dusk, all grey stone and narrow windows, more fortress than home. The staff stood assembled in the entrance hall, silent and watchful in a way that unsettled her more than any welcome could. Lord Ashworth handed her off to the housekeeper without quite meeting her eyes. "See her ladyship to her rooms," he said. "I've correspondence to attend to." "Will you not join me for supper, my lord?" Helena asked, before she could stop herself. He paused at the foot of the staircase. Just for a moment, his shoulders went rigid, as though she had struck some old and tender wound. "Best not," he said. "Good evening, Helena." That was the first night. She told herself it was travel, awkwardness, the strangeness of 2 strangers thrown together. These things settled, given time. She dined alone in her chamber, listening to the clock in the corner tick past 11, past midnight, past 1. The door joining her rooms to his never opened. The second night was the same. So was the third. Within a fortnight, a pattern had hardened into something like law. They met at breakfast, at either end of a table long enough to seat 20, and spoke of the weather and the state of the roads with a politeness so careful it felt rehearsed. He was, she learned, an excellent landlord, fair with his tenants, quick to mend a roof or forgive a bad harvest. But when the light began to fail in the evening, something in him changed. His eyes would drift to the windows. His color would go. By 8 o'clock without fail, he excused himself, always with the same flat, practiced words, "I've letters to write," and disappeared down the east corridor, not to be seen again until morning. He never touched her hand at the table. He never lingered near her in a doorway. It was not the coldness of a man repulsed by his wife. It was something far more deliberate, the careful, mathematical distance of a man keeping himself apart from her on purpose, as if closeness itself were dangerous. Helena was not given to weeping. But she was given to curiosity, and a woman cannot solve a puzzle she has been forbidden to look at. By the third week, that curiosity had become something closer to obsession. She learned which floorboards creaked and which maids gossiped. She noticed how the staff, though plainly devoted to their master, moved through the halls with a strange, watchful tension, as though the house itself were holding its breath. When she asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, why his lordship's valet was never seen before noon, the answer came too smoothly. His lordship prefers to dress himself, my lady. A simple habit of his. It was, Helena thought, a very particular sort of lie, the kind told by someone well practiced in telling it. The east wing became her private fixation. Her own rooms faced the gardens, bright and unremarkable. Lord Ashworth's official bedchamber sat beside hers, grand and untouched. The sheets never rumpled, the grate never lit. He slept somewhere else entirely, down a narrow passage behind the library, at the end of which stood a heavy door bound in iron, with no keyhole at all, only a bolt. She found it on a wet afternoon in the fourth week, having lost her way searching for a book of sonnets. The corridor beyond the library door was cold in a way the rest of the house wasn't, the air gone stale and close. She was still several feet from the iron-bound door when she heard it, a low, dragging scrape, wood against wood, and beneath it, a slow and terrible rhythm, like something striking a wall again and again. My lady. She turned to find Thomas Wren, the valet, watching her from the passage's mouth, a stack of linens in his arms and something close to panic in his face. This wing's kept shut for the draught, my lady. His lordship prefers it so. What is behind that door, Wren? Old furniture, my lady. Nothing fit to trouble you with. She looked at the fresh water in the basin he carried and did not believe him for a single moment. But she nodded, and walked away, and said nothing more, that night. After that, she stopped filling their silences at dinner with talk of the weather. She began, instead, to watch. She saw the toll the nights were taking on him, the raw red mark circling his wrist one morning, quickly hidden beneath his cuff. The split lip he blamed, unconvincingly, on a startled horse, though she had watched him ride, and he rode like a man born to it. He was unraveling by degrees, and every day the mask of good manners grew a little thinner. On the 28th night, as he rose from the table at his customary hour, she finally spoke his name. Rowan. He went still, one hand braced on the back of his chair, and did not look at her. I don't care that you've never shared my bed, she said, her voice shaking with something that was not quite anger. I don't care that ours is a bargain rather than a love match. But I will not sit in this house and watch you destroy yourself while your own servants treat me as a child too foolish to notice. He turned, at last, and for one unguarded moment the composed, distant lord vanished entirely. What was left in his eyes was something closer to drowning. You don't know what you're asking of me, he said, low and rough, as though the words themselves cost him something. Then tell me. I cannot. He stepped back toward the door. Lock your chamber tonight, Helena. Whatever you hear, do not come looking. The 30th night arrived with a storm that had been building all week, the sky bruising purple by afternoon, the staff moving through the halls with an urgency close to fear. Lord Ashworth did not come down to dinner at all. Mrs. Pemberton delivered his regrets in a voice that would not quite hold steady. And when Helena asked whether Wren was with him, the housekeeper hesitated a moment too long before admitting that the valet had ridden to the village that morning, and the roads, with the storm, were now impassable. No one, it seemed, was attending Lord Ashworth that night. Helena waited until the house had gone dark and still, then took up a single candle and walked, for the second time, into the east wing. The corridor was black as a well. As she neared the iron-bound door, the sounds began, not the low scrape of before, but something wilder. Furniture striking plaster. A man's voice, breaking beneath its own weight, caught somewhere between a shout and a sob. The bolt, she found, had been thrown back. Wren always secured it from outside, and without him, no one had. Her hand trembled on the cold iron latch. "Lock your chamber tonight." She pushed the door open anyway. The room inside was stripped bare, no rug, no ornament, nothing that might wound. The walls were lined in heavy quilted canvas, worn and stained. The single window had been boarded from within. In the center of the floor, bolted down, stood a plain wooden chair. Lord Ashworth was not in it. He was pressed into the far corner, knees drawn to his chest, his shirt torn at the shoulder, his arms raised as though warding off a blow only he could see. "Hold formation," he rasped, staring straight through her. "Hold the line, don't let them break the square." He wasn't at Thornfield at all. He was somewhere years gone, on some field she would never see. He surged forward, not at her but at nothing, and struck the padded wall with his shoulder before sliding down it, chest heaving, eyes wide and unseeing. "Edmund," he choked out. "Edmund, get up, the smoke, you have to get up." Helena stood frozen in the doorway only a moment. Every rumor of his coldness, every assumption of cruelty, dissolved in an instant. This was his secret, the reason for the locked door, the bruised wrists, the valet who washed away sweat and blood before dawn. He chained himself in the dark so that he might harm no one but himself when his mind dragged him back to whatever field had broken him. Without Wren to anchor him tonight, the storm had torn him loose entirely. She set down her candle and crossed the bare floor, kneeling a careful distance from him. "Rowan," she said, her voice stripped of every ounce of drawing-room polish. "It's only a voice in the dark. Nothing more." He flinched violently, muttering something about grapeshot, about holding the square, and did not see her at all. She closed the distance anyway. She took his cold, shaking hands in hers and held on though he tried to pull away. "You are at Thornfield," she said, firm and steady, leaning into his line of sight. "You are in England. It is only a storm. Nothing is burning. Edmund. It's Helena." She gripped his torn sleeve, anchoring him bodily to the present. "It is autumn. You are 34 years old. You are safe." Thunder rolled again, long and low, and he flinched as though struck, a broken sound escaping him. Then, all at once, the fight went out of him, and he pitched forward into her arms. She caught his full weight and held him, one hand buried in his hair, and did not let go. "I have you," she whispered into the dark. "I have you. It's over now." For 30 days they had not touched. Now, on the bare floor of a room built to contain his worst nights, Lord Ashworth wept in his wife's arms until there was nothing left to weep. Dawn came gray and reluctant, filtering through the cracks in the boarded window. Helena woke with her back aching against the canvas wall, her arm gone entirely numb beneath the weight of her husband's sleeping head. His storm had finally broken sometime before 4, leaving behind only an exhausted, hollowed stillness. Asleep, he looked younger. The fierce lines of his face gone slack, though the bruises beneath his eyes told their own story. She studied the crescent marks his own nails had left in his palms and understood, with sudden and total clarity, exactly what it cost a man like him to survive each night twice over. At 6:30, the bolt outside the door scraped back, and he woke instantly, violently, scrambling upright with the raw panic of a man ambushed in his sleep. Until his eyes found her, and the panic gave way to something far worse. Shame, absolute and crushing. He turned his face away, dragging his torn sleeve down over his wrist. Wren appeared in the doorway a moment later, soaked through from the storm, a leather satchel in one hand. He took in the empty chair, his master huddled against the wall, and Lady Ashworth sitting beside him, and went perfectly white. "My lady, my lord." The bridge at the low crossing gave way, I had to ride the long way round, I tried to. "It's quite all right, Wren," Helena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The storm has passed." She rose, her numb leg giving way beneath her, and Lord Ashworth caught her elbow before she could fall. The first time, she realized, he had touched her willingly since handing her into the carriage outside St. Michael's a month before. He looked down at his own hand on her arm as though it belonged to a stranger, and let go at once. "Wren," he said hoarsely, not looking at her, "see her ladyship to her rooms. Ensure none of the staff." "No," Helena said. He stiffened. "I am not a scandal to be managed, Rowan. And I will not leave you sitting on the floor of a locked room." She turned to the valet. "Draw his lordship a bath. In his proper chamber, not here." Wren bowed and fled down the corridor with visible relief. Helena turned back to her husband, who was still staring at the floorboards. "You should never have seen this," he said quietly. "You cannot know what you have bound yourself to." "I bound myself to a man who mends his tenants' roofs, keeps honest ledgers, and apparently does battle with ghosts after dark," she said. "Now get up. The floor is cold, and I want my tea." He looked at her offered hand for a long moment, weighing, she understood, some risk she couldn't fully see. Then he rose under his own power, refusing the help, but he did not walk away from her either. "Lead on, then," he said. They spoke properly for the first time that afternoon, in the library, with the storm-washed sky pouring pale light through the tall windows. He sat by the cold hearth, she sat across from him, a tea service neither of them touched growing cold between them. "How long?" she asked. She didn't need to explain the question. "Since the autumn of '99, he said, his voice gone flat and clinical, the way soldiers sometimes speak of things too large to feel. 7 years now. Before that, for more years of breaking things, furniture, windows, a groom's arm once, though he forgave me for it. My father sent me to a physician in London who prescribed laudanum and bleeding, and when that failed, suggested a house in Surrey for gentlemen who could no longer be trusted among polite company." He looked at her directly for the first time. "I came home instead. I built that room myself, plank by plank, so that whatever happened in the dark, it happened to no one but me. And you thought you could marry, and simply hide it forever. I thought," he said, and his voice cracked at last, "that if I gave you wealth enough, and freedom enough, and distance enough, you would learn to overlook the eccentricities of a husband who preferred solitude. Half the marriages in England are built on far less than that. I am not half of England, Rowan. I am your wife, in law, in name, and now, whether you like it or not, in fact." She leaned forward. "I watched my own father ruin our family at the card tables because he could not bear to admit he'd lost control of anything. I will not watch my husband chain himself to a chair rather than ask a living soul for help. There is no help for what happened to me," he said, the words cracking like a whip as he rose and paced to the window. "Do you think I choose to cower in a corner like a beaten animal? When the light goes, I smell smoke that isn't there. I hear men screaming who died 7 years ago. I cannot reason my way out of it, Helena, because in that moment my own mind will not permit me to believe I have survived it." He gripped the window frame until his knuckles whitened. "You were brave last night. But bravery tires. Pity tires faster. One day you will look at me and see only what I am, a broken thing wearing a title." "Who was Edmund?" she asked quietly. He went utterly still. "An ensign under my command," he said, at last, to the window rather than to her. 19 years old. A vicar's youngest son, too proud to admit he was frightened. We were holding a farmhouse when the roof came down under artillery fire. He was trapped beneath the beams. I ordered the line held. I stood there, Helena, and I listened to him burn, and I did not go to him, because 100 other men were depending on me to hold that position." He pressed his forehead to the cold glass. "I have never told another living soul that." Helena crossed the room and laid her hand flat between his shoulder blades. Beneath the fine wool of his coat, every muscle was locked rigid. "You kept your men alive," she said. "That is what a commanding officer does. You did not start that war, Rowan, and you did not light that fire. I let a boy die. You held a line so that others might live. Both things can be true. She turned him gently to face her. Here are my terms, my lord. I will not pity you. I will not flinch from you. And I will not permit that door to be bolted from the outside ever again. If I am not bound, I cannot promise your safety. Then you will learn to trust that I am safer beside you than you believe. Ren may sleep in the adjoining room if it eases you. But you will sleep in your own bed, beside mine, and if you wake, you will call for me, and we shall keep the lamps burning till dawn if we must, every night, for as long as it takes. You are asking for a lifetime of sleepless nights. I am asking for a marriage, she said. Which is rather more than either of us bargained for at St. Michael's, and rather less than either of us deserves to go without. He looked at her for a long moment, searching, she realized, for the disgust he had been braced for since the day they married. He did not find it. What he found instead was something steadier, not a cure, but a willingness to stand in the wreckage beside him. No more locks, he said finally, and took her hand. The weeks that followed were no fairy tale. Trauma does not surrender because two people have struck a bargain in a sunlit library. The nights still came hard. He woke tearing at his collar, certain of smoke that wasn't there. He shattered a looking-glass one evening, convinced for one terrible instant that the reflection wore a French uniform. But the pattern had changed. He no longer spiraled alone in the dark until it swallowed him. Now, when the terror came, a voice cut through it. Helena did not soothe him with soft words or pretend the memories weren't real to him, because she understood they were. Instead she anchored him with plain, unglamorous fact. The carpet is blue, Rowan. It is 3 a.m. Feel the draft, that is the window, not the wind off a battlefield. You are at Thornfield. She sat near enough to reach him but did not try to hold him still through the worst of it, only stayed, steady and unmoving, until the storm in him passed. Ren kept laudanum close at hand, but it was called for less and less as the month wore on. By the height of autumn, something like ease had crept into their daylight hours. The frozen silence of their early breakfasts thawed into real conversation, not of the war, not of the nights, but of the estate, of tenants and crop yields and the sly miller at the South Mill whose grain returns had somehow dropped even as he bought a second cart horse. Helena, it turned out, had a sharper head for figures than her husband, and they began reviewing the ledgers together in the library each afternoon, heads bent over the same page, close enough that she could smell the leather and cedar of him and find it, unexpectedly, comforting rather than strange. One such afternoon, he leaned in to check her arithmetic and simply did not lean back. Their eyes met over the ledger, and the careful distance they had built around their daytime hours quietly, wordlessly dissolved. He reached up and tucked a loose curl behind her ear, his thumb grazing her jaw, and did not flinch away from his own tenderness for once. You are a formidable creature, Helena Ashworth, he said. I am merely paying attention, she answered, breathless despite herself. You are the only steady thing in this entire house. He was leaning down to kiss her when the library door flew open and Ren burst in, flushed scarlet with a stack of Morning Post and considerably more apology than the moment strictly required. Lord Ashworth stepped back at once, clearing his throat, though the tips of his ears stayed distinctly red. What is it, Ren? A letter, my lord. From the War Office. Come by special messenger. The temperature of the room seemed to drop by half. Lord Ashworth stared at the heavy seal for a long moment before breaking it, and Helena watched the fine tremor return to his hand as he read, the same tremor that had taken nearly a month of careful nights to still. He finished, folded the letter with unsettling precision, and dropped it onto the cold hearth as though it might burn him. Rowan. What does it say? He didn't answer. He turned for the door, and something in his face told her exactly where he meant to go. Back down the east corridor, back to the padded room and the bolt and the chair. She reached the letter before he reached the door, and read it herself while he stood frozen, unable to stop her. It was not an order. It was a summons, from the Board of Army Pensions. A Mrs. Susan Cole of Norfolk had petitioned for her late son's widow's portion, an ensign, Edmund Cole, listed as missing at the farmhouse action 7 years prior, his fate never formally recorded. Without a commanding officer's sworn testimony of his death in the course of duty, the boy remained, on paper, a deserter, and his mother would receive nothing at all. To settle the matter, Lord Ashworth was required to appear in London and give account, under oath, of exactly how Ensign Cole had died. He would have to say it aloud. In a room full of strangers. To the boy's own mother. "I cannot," he said, the words torn out of him raw. "I will send the woman £1,000 tomorrow. I will settle a house on her. But I cannot stand in a London chamber and speak his name aloud. £1,000 will not clear a dead boy's name of desertion, Rowan," Helena said gently. "His mother does not need your money. She needs to know her son did not run. He didn't run." The shout tore out of him, sending a stack of ledgers crashing from the desk. "He was pinned under the beam. I know precisely how he died. I have lived it every night for 7 years." He backed away, hands dragging through his hair, eyes darting for an exit that wasn't there. "If I say it aloud, if I make it real in front of strangers, I will not survive hearing myself say it. I will lose whatever is left of my mind." He turned and bolted for the door. Helena caught his sleeve before he reached it, and though his momentum nearly took her off her feet, she dug in and held on, slamming her back against the door before he could open it. "You are not locking yourself away again," she said, chest heaving. "We are finished with the dark, Rowan. That letter is not asking you to relive the war. It is asking you to hold the line for him one final time. His mother needs you to do for him now what you could not do for him then. I am not fit to do anything for anyone. I can barely hold myself together. Then hold together for 1 hour, in one room, and tell the truth. That is all. You do not have to save him this time. He is already gone. You only have to lay him to rest properly. I cannot go to London alone. The noise, the crowds, it will sound like the guns." "You will not go alone," Helena said, and took his face in both her hands until he met her eyes. "I am coming with you. We leave in the morning." The road to London was a mirror of that first, cold journey to Thornfield, except that now they sat on the same bench, her shoulder pressed to his the whole way, and when his breathing turned too fast and shallow, she took his hand and let him grip it hard enough to bruise. They reached the townhouse in the evening, its rooms shrouded in dust sheets, cold with disuse. The hearing was set for 9 the following morning. Dinner went untouched. Lord Ashworth paced the drawing room until near midnight, flinching at every carriage wheel on the cobbles outside, every distant shout, sounds that meant nothing to Helena and everything, still, to some buried part of him. "They fire the cannon in the park at noon tomorrow," he said at last, staring at nothing. "For the King's birthday." It was in the postscript of the letter. His jaw tightened. "Artillery, Helena. Tomorrow, of all days." That night, she did not let him retreat to a separate room. She sat with him until the fire burned to embers, made him speak the whole of it aloud to her, every detail he had never once permitted himself to say, until, by the time the sky had begun to pale, some of the rigidity had gone out of his shoulders, and he slept, for once, without waking. Whitehall smelled of old paper and floor wax, its corridors lined with clerks who carried men's whole lives reduced to ink. Helena waited on a hard bench outside the hearing room while Lord Ashworth stood at the window in his formal dress, his knuckles white around his walking stick. When the clerk called his name, she gave him a single steady nod, and he walked in alone. The chamber held 3 commissioners at a long table, and at its far end, a small woman in worn black bombazine, her hands folded with the quiet, terrible patience of someone who has waited 7 years for an answer. "The Crown's record states the boy broke ranks," the lead commissioner began. "Without a body, we must presume." "The Crown presumes wrongly," Lord Ashworth said, and his voice did not shake. Ensign Cole did not break ranks. He was holding the south wall of a farmhouse under my command when the roof collapsed under artillery fire. He had gone back inside to pull 2 wounded men clear. The main beam came down before he could follow them out. I ordered the position held. We could not reach him in time. He paused only a moment. He burned to death defending men who lived because of him. He was the bravest boy I ever commanded, and he was 19 years old. Mrs. Cole made a small, broken sound and pressed a hand to her mouth. Outside in the corridor, Helena heard the first cannon fire across the park, the glass trembling faintly in its frame. She was on her feet at once, hand on the door, ready to go to him. Inside, she would learn later, Lord Ashworth's shoulders had snapped rigid at the sound, his breath catching hard, and then Mrs. Cole had risen from her chair, crossed the room, and laid her small hand over his on the walking stick. "Thank you, my lord," she said, as the second cannon sounded and he did not flinch from it. "Thank you for bringing my boy home to me." By the 5th report, he stood entirely steady, and the room smelled only of floor wax and the old woman's lavender water, and nothing at all like smoke. "Strike the word deserter from every record that bears it," Lord Ashworth told the commissioners, his voice returning to its full authority. "Grant Mrs. Cole the full pension owed her, backdated to the year of her son's death. See it done within the week, or you will answer to me in the House of Lords." He bowed to Mrs. Cole, turned, and walked out through the double doors, where Helena stood waiting, pale and rigid with hope. He crossed the corridor in 3 strides, dropped his walking stick to the floor without a thought for who might see, and pulled her into his arms in front of every clerk in Whitehall. "It's finished," he said against her hair, his voice thick. 7 years, and it's finally finished. They walked out into a London gone bright and loud and impossibly alive after the storm, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Lord Ashworth did not flinch from the noise of the living world. He offered her his arm. She took it without hesitation, and together they stepped down into the crowded street, leaving the ghosts, at last, behind them in the quiet dark of Whitehall.